Everyone. I'm Joyce Millard Hoie from Raising Special Kids, and this is Julie Jacobelli from Phoenix Philanthropy Group, and we're delighted to have you with us this morning for a session on fund development. A couple of months ago, Barb Buswell called me and asked if I would do a session on fund development this year, and I was mildly freaked out. I looked at what I had done last year, and I told Barb, I think I exhausted my knowledge on the subject last year. I just poured forth this whole reservoir of information that I had, everything I thought I knew about fund development, and that was fine, and that was it. I did that last year. And if you were in the session last year, you know that I wore my beach clothes and my flip-flops. And I did that for a couple of reasons. And one was because I think sometimes we're not always appropriately attired for some of the responsibilities that we need to assume for our organization. We don't always come properly equipped with the right kind of apparel in terms of our experience, our skill set, our knowledge, our expertise, and our background. And so feeling rather out of my depth, I thought that would be a perfect way to illustrate that. It also was a way to pay tribute to Barb Buswell, who actually had to present at a national conference one time in a t-shirt and flip-flops because her suitcase didn't arrive. But I knew that this session needed to be something that was relevant and practical and useful, and acknowledge the wonderful leadership roles that you all play for your organizations. The phenomenal work that you do to lead and guide your organizations, the tremendous responsibilities you assume, the very significant work that you accomplish for families and children. So feeling the weight of that, I summoned up all of my courage and took a deep breath and said, okay, Richard will do it. By that I meant Richard Tollefson, who was supposed to present the session with me today. Almost everything I know about fund development I learned from Richard Tollefson. When he was the director of development at Arizona State University, I had an office right next to his. And the fund development mojo that came out of that office seeped through the walls and under the floors and through the doors and the windows, and it's the reason I'm standing here in front of you today. So everything I felt that I learned about fund development certainly came from Richard, but unfortunately, because of a family member's serious illness, he could not be with us today. But the good news is that he sent a wonderful representative, Julie Jacobelli. And Julie has really walked the walk. She comes to us as an experienced executive director for 17 years, serving organizations, nonprofits in New Mexico and Arizona. Most recently as CEO of Communities and Schools in Arizona. She was in 2002 named the Executive Director of the Year by the Organization of Nonprofit Executives and has an MBA degree from the University of Nebraska. I'm so thrilled and delighted that she is with us today to present this session and greatly relieved. Please welcome Julie.
Wow, she's really set me up. So anyway, it is really an honor to be here. I don't get to do this very often, and it is a lot of fun to be in the room with people who are going through many of the same things that I went through for, as Joyce said, about 17 years of my life, which I can't believe I spent that much time doing that. But anyway, I'm very fortunate now to be part of the Phoenix Philanthropy Group, and Richard does send his regrets. He really, really wanted to be here today, primarily because, well, he likes to talk, if anyone knows Richard, but you know, he is working, he is one of the consultants that's working with Raising Special Kids and on their consulting project. And so we'll be talking about that at the end today to talk a little bit about that project. But before we get going, I would really like to know who's in the room, because it's kind of, you know, it's nice to know who I'm talking to and, you know, what your role is. I'm assuming most of you, if not all of you in the room, will be at that CEO, executive director level. So if you could just tell me who you are, who you're with, maybe how long you've been in that role, and then I'm going to ask for one fun fact. I want you to share with me what your most indulgent TV show is that you like to watch these days. So, and I'm going to start because I don't think it's fair to ask other people to tell things. well, you know who I am, but my favorite TV show, and I will admit it, is The Young and the Restless. I started watching it in college, and I don't watch it every day. I do read synopsises every now and then, but I'm still a Young and Restless fan. So I'll start with you, Gabriella.
I'm Gabriela Perez. I'm with Denver Metro Community Parent Research Center, and I'm here to fill in for our executive director, which is in the next session. I've been with the CPRC for a couple months. I'm only helping temporarily. And my favorite show is a cooking show on the Food Network channel. Is it Chopped?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's my favorite show.
Joyce, what's your favorite show?
Well, I would say that I got hooked on Mad Men. On the series.
I'm Glenda Davis, and I'm the director of the Parent Center in Nebraska.
Yay! I knew there were going to be a Cornhuskers
Well,
here.
there's always a Nebraskan wherever you go.
Yeah.
Joyce was a temporary Nebraskan.
I was born in Omaha, so not temporary.
Well, not too temporary, no, that's true. And there's been nothing on TV since The Sopranos, and I sorely miss them. Sorely miss them.
My name is Cheryl Craze. I'm from South Dakota, and I'm in a newly created position of Communications and Development Coordinator for the organization. I've done managed corporate giving program for a corporation, small corporation. And my favorite program, I watch a lot of HGTV, but probably my favorite is one that you have to catch here and there is Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
Yes.
I love that.
My name is Sarah Billerbeck, and I am on the board of directors for Parent Center, and this is my third year doing that. And we got rid of our cable, so I watch everything online. But so I don't know, does that count as a TV show still? Yeah. I think I really try to watch The Daily Show and Stephen Colbert. I can do that. Great.
Johnny Wilson, I'm the executive director of Parents Reaching Out, statewide parent center in Mexico. And yeah, I don't watch TV much, but we did rent, I'm trying to remember the name of it. I like those shows. Breaking Bad, because Albuquerque actually is a character in that show, but it got a little too intense and I stopped renting it.
John Doug, I'm a male host from the Utah Parent Center. And my guilty pleasure is HGTV. Who else said that? But with my husband, we watch NCIS.
I'm Joan Carpingo, and I'm with the Pathfinder Parent Center on Minot. And I should tell you a quick little story. I like fundraising. I help my daughter and our community raise $200,000 to build an all-accessible playground. Wow. So this is kind of where my heart is too. And my favorite TV show is Castle.
It's what?
Castle. Castle is a detective. He's a book writer, and he runs with the police department. And
So congratulations on raising all that money. That's great.
My name is Larry Fuller. I'm with Parent Center in New Mexico, Parent Reaching Out with Mr. Wilson. I've been there about 24 years. And my favorite TV show, I think, is NCIS.
Morning, everybody. My name is Dale Vicente. I'm from Pueblo, about an hour west of Albuquerque.
And a very beautiful place.
Thank you.
Yes.
I've been with sit on the board of directors with the Fix Project. So I'm involved with a little bit of everything. The TV series I do wrestling.
Right.
Hi, I'm Kathy Harstead, and I'm the executive director at the Pathfinder Parent Center in North Dakota.
And all have been there 2 years this coming August. And although my husband and I really do like NCIS, my favorite guilty indulgence show for me is The Good Wife. I'm Connie Sienkiewicz, and I'm with the Parent Center, and I'm from Wichita in Kansas. And I've been the executive director for, I had to do the math, 14 years. And I don't watch a lot of TV, but the American Test Kitchen is fun.
Is that on the Food Network?
Yes.
Heard of it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think so.
It's public TV, is
No,
Okay.
I don't know. It's just interesting that they, try all these things, and this didn't work, and they trusted this, and they put this ingredient in, and then, so. It's a miracle. It's a miracle.
Yeah.
And I don't have to make all those mistakes.
I'm Terry Dawson from the Wyoming Parent Center, and I'm the founder and executive director for 20 years. And now that West Wing is no longer on, The Good Wife is my favorite show.
Hi, I'm Barb Buswell, founder and executive director of the Parent Center, and I think that my son has immersed me in medical things, and so House is probably still one of my favorites.
I'm Beth Schaffner, and I'm with Peak Parent Center, one of the technical assistant specialists for our TA project. And boy, it is a guilty pleasure, and I think because I need music in my life as much as I can put it in there, and I like the dancing too, is Dancing with the Stars.
Okay. I thought you were going to say Glee.
Or Glee.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is Jeanette.
This is Jeanette Trancosa from the Ethics Project. She's the executive director of the Native American Parent Center in New Mexico. And you've been there 2 years as they have just become their own nonprofit now for 2 years.
All right.
And The Good Wife.
The Good Wife? Okay.
Hi, I'm Sharma Davis Barrett, and I'm at Pacer Center, which is in Minnesota, and I'm co-director for the Technical Assistance Center. It works with parent centers. And let's see, I've been at Pacer this November. It will be 24 years. And since being at Pacer, I've always done technical assistance, except for 2 years when I did do what was called the PERT project that we had. And we did this at Christmas, favorite TV, and people had to guess. And my son guessed right away, and it is my favorite show, is Anthony Bourdain. I just no reservations.
Yes. Great. All right. Well, great. It's nice to get to know all of you. And just to set a little bit of context, the PowerPoint and some articles are on the website. It's my understanding that that's all put up there, so I don't know if you brought copies of that, but if not, you can access that information there. And then also, Joyce did a great job of laying the foundation for Richard and now for me by reaching out. I think she reached out to a few people and asked some questions about fundraising or what questions you might have or want to have answered in the context of this today. So hopefully I'm going to be able to make this work. It's a little different. Okay, so some of the things we're going to talk about today are some of the issues and questions that had come up were the role of the executive director and the role of board of directors, and I'm excited to hear that we've got a mix of both here in the room today. Talk a little bit about organizational capacity and how it impacts fundraising, some effective strategies for fundraising success, identifying donors and prospects, which we're going to touch on, making the ask, engaging staff or contractors or consultants, and then we'll also have an opportunity for any other questions that you might have. I would really like this to be a conversation today. So as I move through this, and I have a lot of information, so if I'm moving too quickly, please do stop me. But also, if you have questions when we're talking about a specific section, go ahead and ask those questions. And then when we come around to the end, If we've got some time left, we'll have some more question and answers, or I'll also refer to the list of questions that Joyce gave to Richard and myself, and we'll make sure we try to hit everything that you have. So today our discussion, I'm going to start out giving you a little bit of information about charitable giving, an overview, talk about why we raise funds, introduce you, if you're not familiar with it, to the relationship management cycle and talk a little bit about that, talk about what the components of a comprehensive fundraising program are, looking at what the foundation for fundraising, the types of things that you should be having as a foundation for fundraising, and then a little bit about volunteers and staff roles and responsibilities. We're going to touch on performance measures, a very important piece of any fund development program or fundraising program, one that's often overlooked. Talk about some of what makes a successful fundraiser. And then I'm going to encourage Joyce to talk a little bit about Raising Special Kids and the Phoenix Philanthropy Group relationship, and talk about the work that they have engaged our organization to do with respect to the needs that they have. And as I said, any issues or other questions that I either don't touch on or that come up while we're talking, you're more than welcome to bring those up. So, any questions before we get started? Am I projecting enough? I'm usually quite loud, so I don't think that'll be an issue, but let me know if I get to a point where you can't hear me. All right, so let's talk a little bit about charitable giving, and I have a series of 4 slides to go through on this, and I want to go through very quickly. But I want you to look at these slides in a couple of ways. Number one, if it's information that you haven't been exposed to, that's one way. But also look at these as slides that you can use when you're talking to your boards of directors and trying to educate them on their role in fundraising and why they should be part of the fundraising mix. Because I think, a lot of the questions were around, my board doesn't want to fundraise, my board isn't comfortable fundraising, and things like that. So anything that we can do as chief professional officers to help train our boards of directors and give them the information they need, then that's something we should be focusing on. How many people in the room are familiar with the Giving USA report that comes out in July? Okay, great. Well, every July, Giving USA produces this wonderful report, very large report. I've never read the whole thing. Got lots of different slides, cuts the data a lot of different ways, but really looks at what the trends are in philanthropic giving in the previous year. So this slide here, as you can see, in the year 2009, charitable giving in our country was $303 billion, actually over $303 billion. And why I like to show this slide, and what I'll often do when I'm doing training with boards of directors, is I'll ask the question, so if you had to guess where the largest percentage of funding for your organization comes from, what would you say? And what do you guess that most of the boards of directors say?
Grants.
Foundations? Okay. Got friends?
Grants.
Grants. Okay, I'm sorry, grants. Okay. Those are exactly corporate, depending upon where they're coming from, what they happen to do for a living. Corporations is by far the #1 answer on all that. 4% of all philanthropic giving in 2009 was from corporations. So when you're trying to move your board from a non-fundraising to a fundraising board, this is your backup of information. 75% of philanthropic giving is from individuals. And if you add bequests, which are, that's individual giving, that's legacy gifts, plan gifts, that's another 8%. So that's 83% of all that $303 billion was given this way. So I encourage you to go out and grab these slides from the PowerPoint that's posted and use them, because that helps them understand that, people give to people. That's the bottom. If you learn nothing else today, people give to people, and keep that in mind. So the nice thing about individual giving too, the giving was down about 3.6% last year, which in light of all that's been going on in the economy, that's not so bad. But people are still, individuals are giving because corporation dollars go away. They come and go depending upon what their bottom line is. But I know as a personal individual giver, I worked very hard to make sure that my philanthropic giving remained the same last year to the organizations that I support, because I know how important it is. That's how individual donors think, so those are the ones you need to focus your time on. The second slide here talks about the different areas that people contribute to. Religion being the largest, which is, that's kind of understandable, but education, health and human services, arts and culture, things like that. So one of the things I encourage you to do is take a little bit of time when you have a free minute and really study that and look at all the different areas that your organization really does affect. I know we sometimes tend to pigeonhole ourselves into one area. I used to pigeonhole myself into education because I was with communities and schools. Well, when I really looked at what we do, we affect health, we affect human services, we affect arts and culture because we brought those kinds of things to the kids to help make them more rounded. So think about that. You know, if people like to give in different areas, think about how what you do and the programs and services that you have and the impact that you make on the people that you serve can fit into those different areas. And think about how you would articulate that if somebody said to you, well, gee, I really like to give to arts and culture organizations. So if what you're doing provides some of that to the people that you serve, then you know how do you make the case for that? This is a chart that shows how total giving for the most part has continued to increase. There's a couple of years, 2009 down a little bit, and I think about 1997 is when there was a little bit of a downtick. And everything I'm reading now indicates that giving is going to continue. It should be up again this year. I will have to say though, people always ask consultants this question, what do you think is going to happen? And I have to say, honestly, I'm not sure. We're in unprecedented times, uncharted waters, and I do not believe that it'll ever be the way it was before the economy collapsed in 2008. So, but we just have to be ready to be adaptive, and but to understand that people are still investing in charitable organizations. And then this slide helps reinforce something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and that's accountability. If we had 819,000 nonprofits in 2000 and we've got 1.2 million in 2009, what that tells me is competition is continuing to get stiffer every year, and that's probably going to happen. So we need to be accountable, we need to do a good job with our donors, we need to position ourselves as the organization that people want to to invest in. And I'll talk more about how we're doing that. But these are really great slides, and like I said, I encourage you to use them with your boards of directors because they're eye-opening to them. So why do we raise funds? We raise funds because we believe in the organization that we're doing. We believe in the mission, vision, and values and everything that the organization does. And we raise funds because we need to support programs and services. Having some chats with Joyce last night and talking about the challenges that you're going through. You know, the government funding is being slashed here, there, and everywhere, and I'm not sure that that's done yet. So I understand the urgency and the importance of philanthropic giving to your organizations for supporting those programs and services. We raise funds, we do that we want to increase brand awareness. I mean, we want to get out there in front of people. We want people to know who we are. And we raise funds to engage our constituent base. And what you'll hear, and I may repeat it more times than not, but it's fundraising, but it's really friend raising. And that's what I always talk to when I talk to my boards of directors, because they're nervous about having to raise money and all that. I mean, we're nervous about it. But you know, it's really about sharing your passion with someone and allowing them the opportunity to share in that passion. So I always use that term friend raising right along with the term fundraising, because it's not, honestly, it is not just about the dollar. And you know, I know people say, well, what if you don't make budget? I don't care. It's not just about getting dollars into the organization. You're going to be raising funds because you need to diversify that revenue and increase your financial stability. You know, it's the more money that we have in the bank, the more reserves that we have, that means we're more likely to be able to have a long-term relationship with our constituents and with our clients. And it's really to impact those that we serve, and we need to tie that back to everything we do. How many people have heard about the relationship management cycle? Okay. I first like to say when I start to talk to boards of directors about fundraising is that it's not sales, because the first thing the board members say to me is, well, Julie, I'm not a salesman. That's not what I do for a living. Okay, well, I'm not a salesman either. It's not about sales. It's about customer service, having outstanding customer service. And when I talk about customer service, I talk about donor and prospect cultivation and stewardship. It's really about mutually beneficial relationships. That's one of the important things. And what we're hearing now from donors is they want to do more than just write a check. They want to know how they can make an impact. Sure, they can write a check. They can write you a $50 check or a $1,000 check or a $10,000 check maybe. But they want to know what it is, what else it is that they can do to, in order to have that relationship be beneficial. It used to be that was just with corporate dollars, and not even foundations so much. But what's the win-win for the corporation? Okay, visibility. They're giving back to the community or whatever. But really, you're looking. Your individual donors are starting to look at that mutually beneficial relationship. They want to be engaged in what it is that you do. You don't want them to manage your business, but you want to reach out to them any opportunity that you have to have them help you provide what it is that you're doing. And it's really about accountability. I'll talk a lot about that. Every time an organization, whether it's nationally or locally, a nonprofit organization has a crisis. Our latest one was the Fiesta Bowl and the unbelievable mismanagement of that. Every nonprofit suffers for that. So we need to make sure that we are positioning ourselves to be one of those organizations that's very transparent and that's very accountable. So when we talk about the relationship management cycle, and then one of the articles that you'll find in the listing out on the website was written by one of my colleagues, Laurel Kimball. She calls it the volunteer wheel of philanthropy. She's much more creative than I, and has a pretty little visual, and I'm very, very boxy oriented there. But this is the relationship management cycle. And one of the mistakes that I think we sometimes make, and I certainly made in the beginning, is not understanding that it is a cycle. It's I thought you start working with someone, and the end goal is really to get the gift or the support or the sponsorship or whatever that might be. But it's really not this way. It's really in a circle. And these are the components of building and maintaining a relationship with the prospect and the donor. Talk about identifying. The first thing you have to do is you have to identify who it is that might be a prospect or a donor to your organization. Some of those identifications are logical, some of them are not. One of the questions that I received in those was, how do you identify prospects? Where do you go look? Well, I implemented a couple of different things. There's many ways to do it. Certainly being out in your communities, going to other organizations, similar if you have them, not necessarily, but going out and seeing who's where. Anytime I walk into a charity's office, I immediately go look at the donor wall, or I'll go out on the website and go look at who their donors are, especially if there's any kind of connection that we might be doing the same things. So always looking at everyone as a potential prospect to be engaged with your organization. But the two things I implemented with my board is, the first one was I do a resource development email once a month. The first of the month, whatever the first Monday is after the month started, I would have my prospect list of my top 10 that we needed information and assistance on. And I would send that out. There'd be other information in there. There might be Fund Development Committee information or update on an event if we were doing one. But really getting those board members to understand that once a month they're going to get this email that says, here's the people, companies, whatever, foundations we're targeting. How can you help me make that connection? The second thing is it's always on the agenda at the board meeting too. Always. Not just the financial report. It's always on there, and we always spend at least 5 to 10 minutes talking about fund development. That's where you can qualify. That's where you get the assistance in qualifying who might be a donor for your organization or a prospect for your organization. Who's got the relationship? Who can get the door open? Those kinds of things. Cultivation. Cultivation really happens all the way throughout all this. Any interaction you have with a potential donor or a prospect or whatever you want to call them is a cultivation opportunity. If you run into them at Starbucks, it's a cultivation opportunity. If you schedule time to go talk to them in their office or in their home, it's all cultivation. Ultimately, that cultivation gets you to that solicitation point. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you make that ask, about that actual solicitation. All the preparation is done before. And again, I want to refer to another article that Steve Zastro, another one of our colleagues, wrote about how 99% of fundraising is that cultivation, is that getting to the point where that ask happens. If you've done your work ahead of time, these are Steve's words, if you've done your work ahead of time, by the time you get to that ask, it should almost be a guarantee. Stewardship is, again, all the way around in every part of that. Anytime you're working with your donors, you know, how you thank them, how quickly you thank them. I'm going to talk about those things a little bit later. And then you're always in the renewal process. So don't think that, you know, just because you got the gift that you don't have to do anything until that time next year. I, you know, have a charity that I supported that, you know, it's really, you know, you ask me for money and I give you $250 and then I don't hear from you for one whole year until you want money from me again. Not an email, not a newsletter, not an e-newsletter, nothing. And, you know, I don't give to them anymore. I mean, you just can't do that in this day and age. Are there any questions on relationship management or any of those pieces? And I'm going to talk about some of the pieces a little bit more in depth later in the presentation.
I just have a quick question about when you're talking about stewardship and how you're not saying, because I know personally I find it annoying when I give money and then the next month they're asking me for more money. But I think what you're saying is, I mean, you could always have that, you know, if you want to donate more, great, but just sort of, you know, here's what's happening this month at peak or whatever, just sort of keeping them in the loop about what's going on. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
It is. You know, you can read a lot of studies about how many times you should touch a donor. That's what we call it, is touching a donor. And some say the optimal number is 7 times. Well, I think it depends upon what the message is that you have to convey. I love to get e-newsletters. I don't think the organization should totally go to e-newsletters. I think there should be at some point something physical for someone to hold on to, especially if you have older donors. Although they're becoming much more technology savvy, I think it's really important for them to have that. It's a little easier for me to separate, you know, if I get something from someone more times, you know, I've given you, you know, I'm not going to do that. But, you know, they say 7 touch points a year, but quality touch points. I would caveat that with quality touch points. Don't make the email newsletter so darn long that I can't read it. I don't have time. I've got about 30 to 45 seconds. I'm going to look at, make sure, I want to see a picture. I want to see a picture of the client, and I don't want to see the face of the executive director as the first picture that comes up. Really? It's like, I don't care about, and I don't mean that, you know, I mean that tongue-in-cheek, but I want to see the face of the clients and the people that I'm making a difference for. So it's really about quality touches, I think, more than quantity touches. There are other people that would say that, you know, you need to be in front of them. So, is there another question?
Well, our center is one of those few nonprofits that has membership. And in the past, our membership hasn't really been promoted very well. And so consequently, the amount of dollars we get to membership is really limited. But with the rise of the individual donor, I'm not convinced that a membership approach is really I'm not sure whether to put more investiture into that or with something. Can you speak to that at all? Have you worked with that?
I have. I'm actually on the board of a small museum in the East Phoenix area in Mesa, and which is a membership organization. You know, you pay your dues and you pay your whatever, and you get to come to the museum if you want to, and that kind of stuff. We actually moved away from that. We moved away from that and went to more of an individual giving opportunity. We did a direct mail solicitation. But we moved away from that just specifically in that membership box and to more of, we wrote, and I'm going to talk about this later and I'm going to encourage Joyce to talk about, we wrote a case for support of why someone should invest in being a part of the museum. They were still a member because they gave, but we didn't focus on the membership piece of it. Now, I think it would depend upon what the benefits that you have to be able to give as to being a member. I think that would be important too. I mean, you know, if it would be more beneficial because you get a lot of things for being a member, then maybe you might still want to continue that. With the museum, I mean, you do. I mean, you get to go to see the museum for free. Well, how many times are you're not going to go to the museum every week? You're not going to go to the museum. Well, maybe you are, but anyway. So that was the approach that we took, and actually it was very successful. We coupled that with a board-driven annual campaign to go out, have the board members go out and solicit funds. And that seemed to be very successful, and we just wanted to change the way that people looked at it, so it wasn't just a membership. It was like, here's the things that we're doing. help us be able to deliver these programs and services out to the community. So, good question though. Okay, so what are some of the components of a comprehensive fundraising program? Special events, certainly sponsorships, that could be sponsoring programs or sponsoring something, you know, a position within your organization. Annual fund, now when I define annual fund, I define that the components of that can be direct mail. It can also be a board-driven annual campaign that is, you know, where the board, as I just talked about. Major gift program is usually part of a comprehensive fundraising program. Again, a lot of people say, well, what does that mean? It means it is defined based on what your organization is structured like or what your prospect or donor pool might look like. So for one organization, a major gift might be $500 or $1,000, and those donors that would be considered major donors. For another organization that might be a multi-million-dollar or several, you know, or a $1 million organization, it might be $1,000 or even $1,500. Planned giving, if none of you are doing planned giving, and as some of you in the room have been in your positions a long time, which leads me to believe your organizations have been around a long time, you know, start looking at what that might look like, because if you've got people that have been supporting you for a long time, then planned giving is the next logical option, and I've got another slide that will show that. Special initiatives or campaigns, capital campaigns, those kinds of things typically fall in this area. Those things aren't ongoing all the time, but can come in and out of your comprehensive fundraising program. And then government grants and contracts and things like that.
I notice you don't have any kind of online giving on there.
That would be in the annual fund. That's where it would be.
Okay.
Because that, to me, online giving, and this is my definition, is like a direct mail solicitation. So I would consider that an annual fund. So when we look at this, we look at the giving pyramid here and talk about, as we talk about the different parts of a comprehensive fundraising program. I talked about annual fund here, and you know, this is going to be your broad base of support. So whether or not you do direct mail, you know, to your group as a whole. Whoops. That's what I get for trying to do two things at once. You know, sponsorships are another piece. You know, a more broader piece of the giving pyramid. You know, special events, certainly a part of it. I just caution with respect to special events. There is a reason for them. Raising money is one of them, but they're also an identification and a qualification strategy also. But just like having all your eggs in a government basket, you don't want to have all your eggs in a special event basket. And I think we as CEOs need to do a good job of educating our board members as to why the answer to our fundraising problems is not to have another special event. I mean, if you really look and really go in and analyze what your return on investment for a special event is, sometimes it's 50 cents on the dollar. Sometimes it's, you know, depending upon what your expenses are. So you have to, and the other thing that we often make the mistake on is not counting staff time in the cost of the special event. Absolutely, when you're building that out, you put that in there, because I can guarantee you, you're going to be spending your time on that and not on something else that you need to be doing. So it's not that it shouldn't be part of it, it's just that, you know, it's more difficult to raise money, and why not spend your time doing something that goes right to the bottom line. Major gifts. And then, as you can see, as you move further up the giving pyramid, then it becomes smaller because you've got less people in those donor pools. But that's really what you want to do, is you want to work people up to ultimately that planned gift. That is really the testament. That is their legacy. That's the highest honor that I could ever give an organization, is to give them a planned gift.
Can you just say what the difference between the annual fund and sponsorships would be? I'm not sure what you mean by sponsorships.
Well, again, I define annual fund as direct mail, board-driven annual campaigns, and as she said, the online giving. Anything that you would do on an annual basis, or maybe 2 times a year. Lots of people do direct mail like 2 times a year. Anything that you would do that would happen about the same time every year would be annual fund. Sponsorships, you know, again, you could be sponsoring a specific someone sponsor a specific program. It depends upon the way you're structured and the way your funding is structured. So I talked a little bit about return on investment, and just this shows where you have less return on investment for special events and more on planned gifts, because I mean it makes sense. And so where does your board want you to spend the money? Where do you want them to get the most bang for the buck? It's building those relationships and getting those gifts that go directly to the bottom line. It doesn't mean that you don't have staff time towards it or some costs, but certainly definitely much higher. And as you might guess, as you start moving along that continuum to those major and planned gifts, those are the more, that's going to be more intensive time, more one-on-one relationships. You don't get a planned gift from somebody that you invited to your golf tournament. You need to spend time with that donor or that prospect.
Can you go back to the previous slide? So what?
Maybe.
What's the relationship for the pyramid versus this return? I mean, I know that. I'm just curious to know the order of how they're listed. Versus the return on investment. Kind of like.
Well, this is more about giving pools than it is about return on investment. So what this is these are your more broad-based. Where your donors, you have more donors at this level, this level, this level, and you have less donors at this level, but you have a higher return on that. So they're not exactly, they don't exactly, so the point of this slide is that you really, wherever you engage your donors at, you want to work them up the pyramid to these bigger gifts. That's what that's supposed to be.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Any questions on relationship management or comprehensive fundraising programs? Anything that I didn't touch on?
Obviously, this is a valuable activity and preserves a piece of our time. Since we have many competing interests, and yet needs for this work. Are there models for nonprofits to balance interests of that? Is it to some nonprofits, if they have some funds, they get expertise in this area, or should you just try to develop your own and get progress or percent progress?
Well, it's going to be very different based on different nonprofits, and very honestly, budget's going to drive some of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit in generalities, and I'm going to relate it a little bit to what I've done because because that's my frame of experience. But the first thing I'd like to say is that one of the things that's going to be very important is that your organization understands and embraces the fact that the executive director is not the only one that fundraises for the organization. I mean that, it's not only, it's short-sighted because what that assumes is that that the executive director has every possible relationship or connection to every relationship that you could get somebody to give money to you, which is not correct. The boards of directors, and I had a board, in my last job, I inherited a board that was, I was sharing this with Joyce last night, that was not a fundraising board, had no culture of fundraising, but there was no expectation set for it. They considered that, when I first was on the job, I went and met with every one of them within the first couple months. And time after time after time, I heard, I don't even know why I'm on this board, it's a rubber stamp board, I don't do anything, I come and listen to reports, blah, 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 blah. And so, it became very apparent to me that I needed to make a culture change. So I asked them, I said, will you give me 1 year to change the culture of the board? Here's what my idea of what a board should do. You set strategic direction, you ensure viability, accountability, legal, ethical, that kind of stuff, and you raise money. Boom. Those 3 things. That's what your boards of directors do. The rest of the stuff is what the staff does. And the third one is the one that the boards usually have the biggest problem with, is the raising of money. And I don't think it's that they don't want to raise money, I think it's that they don't know how to raise money. And so that was my responsibility to I couldn't help them to find out, to get the expertise in the room that can help them do that. And so I think, so board development, so as a CEO, I'm going to talk from the CEO side now. As a CEO, board development and fundraising were definitely a big part of what I did, especially for the first 4 years. I did not have a development director until we were about in the 4.5 years of my 7 years, primarily because we didn't have money to do that. But by that time we were positioned, the board was fundraising, we were positioned, and we were ready to have somebody in that position. Again, with the understanding that you do not bring a development director on and say, okay, go out and raise all the money. It doesn't work that way. It's just like saying that the executive director is going to raise all the money. It just doesn't work that way. It works on building those relationships, and you may have a board member that has a better relationship with somebody, with a prospect or a donor. You may have a development director that does, you may have a CEO or an executive director that does. So it's all about, as I said before, people give to people, and it's all about finding out who has that relationship or who can move that relationship forward. Now, my role as the CEO and then the development director's role was, if that's a volunteer that's in that position, which is okay, that I'm behind the scenes doing the moves management piece, moving that donor or prospect along. So I'm the one that's, prompting that board member to say, okay, next month you need to have lunch with John Smith because he said he wanted to have lunch next month. So, so there's some work on that you need to do. So I would say I probably spent 25% of my time on board, what I call board development, and that's working with my boards of directors, just building relationships. And my board members were donors too, so it's not like I wasn't doing donor cultivation. I mean, I was regularly getting $5,000 and $10,000 donations from my key board members that had that capacity when we were done, and that's because I was spending time with them, just like they were a board member and a donor. But probably 25% of the time there, and then I would say, you as a CEO, if you could be out of the office 50 to 60% of your time in fundraising and board development would be a good thing. But again, I also want to be respectful because I know many of you are wearing multiple hats, and I did it. I mean, I did that. I was the CEO. Really, I mean, it's a nice title, but come on, I cleaned the toilet when it needed to be cleaned, and I'm sure you've done that too, or if it overflows. So, but that's a good question, and I think that you as a person have to just determine what that work-life balance is too, because Joyce and I were talking. I mean, it kind of consumes her now. It consumed me for many years. I think the younger generation or the newer people into the field are a little bit better with that life balance, work balance type thing. But it is definitely. If programs are really your passion and really where you're good, maybe you should think about some succession to someone that really wants to play that CEO role, that visible role out into the community, and you move back into that position. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think everyone should do what they're good at and what they're passionate about.
I think one of the uniquenesses for parent centers is that because we have these federal grants, the federal grants expect us to put more time. We have to put program time in. And so when we're audited, if I'm supposed to be 0.2 or 0.35 or whatever, that has to all be managed. So trying to integrate this government piece with these other pieces is tricky, because we can't charge government grant time when we're cultivating, if we aren't really addressing our program needs. So I think that that's a reality that we all face. I think I'm just making it explicit because it's a tough one.
It is a tough one. And
sometimes you can weave the two together, but that gets hard to keep intact in your head and organize. That takes planning. Sometimes you can't.
Right. When I had the funding, my first investment was not a development person. I could have had the funding to do that. My first investment was a VP of programs or a program person that could take over some of that stuff. Because you know what, that wasn't my area of expertise. Not that fundraising was in the beginning anyway, but it just really wasn't my area of expertise, and I could do it, and I did a good job. Did I do a great job? No. But that was our strategic first investment for our organization. Then, a couple of years later, we moved into the development piece again, too, because it just got to, when you're talking about managing all these donors and this and that and the other, that takes a lot of time. And the worst thing you can do is start down the path with the prospect and then not follow up with them, because you'll lose them. The next person that's following up with them is going to go right in front of you in line. But you certainly do. I think, and again, I only had one or maybe 2 government grants in that time frame, and for us, we made the conscious, you can't do that. We made the conscious decision that we couldn't, with our staffing model, we couldn't make it work, so it wasn't worth the money for us. But I know, and I respect the fact that you can't do that. All right, so let's look a little bit at the foundation of fundraising. Some underlying assumptions here, and you're going to hear this, you're going to see it again and again. It's, what we're trying to achieve here is long-term, mutually beneficial relationships. It's not about the money, it's not just about that, it's about really getting them to not only help the organization, but also for them to feel good and to feel part of the organization. Accountability has to be there. If you're not paying attention to that accountability infrastructure, please, please, please do that. Making sure that your reports are filed on time, making sure that your information is out there for people to see. And then also that you've got a moves management system going. And for anyone who doesn't know what moves management is, it's really about, you can call it moves management, you can call it prospect and donor tracking and management. There's a lot of different terms for it. But it's really understanding that if I'm looking to Joyce, to be a donor, that I've got steps A, B, C, and D in place in my mind and in my system, and the timeline in which they need to happen, although it doesn't always work perfectly, but that I know what my next step is with that person that I'm going to be trying to engage in the organization. And that all of it's done in a donor-centric approach. You'll hear that a lot too. It's always keep in mind, it's not about the organization, it's really about the donor. And sometimes that's a hard shift for people to make. Grief, did that. Okay, mission, vision, and values obviously need to be in place. The work that you do is wonderful, but we have to say this because there are lots of times when an organization really doesn't have a very, very well-defined mission, and they really don't understand what they're doing. But certainly that's something that you have. You need to have a unique position. Doesn't mean you need to be the only person doing what you're doing, but how do you do it that you can talk about that maybe makes it a little bit unique. Unique does not necessarily mean new, though. I'm not a big fan of chasing the money, or foundations aren't quite as bad, but they used to be. Well, it needs to be a new program. Well, okay, but by the time I do a new program, write the policies and procedures, write the program components, get the staff up to speed on it. My $10,000 is gone. So do I really want to? Unique doesn't mean new. It needs to have constituent relations or donor relations in it. And then obviously brand marketing and communications are a big part of it. The good news is that with all the online stuff, while I'm not a big fan of spending all your time on Facebook and Twitter and things like that, it is a new, relatively easy and inexpensive way to get some of that awareness out there. Very, very important that you have funding priorities and goals. How many of you in the room go through a process every year where you identify what your funding priorities are for the year? Great, that's great. That's critical, especially because what it does is it helps focus you. It helps get you to understand what it is that you're going to be going out and raising money for. Helps focus that energy and work. I like to, we like to say be realistic but be assertive. I mean, certainly, if you haven't got a philanthropic or you've got a small philanthropic piece of what it is that you're doing, you're not going to say that in the first year you're going to increase, your budget by 50% and it's going to be all philanthropic. That's not realistic. But set yourself some goals that are stretch goals, but that you can achieve. If your organization is big enough that you might have competing priorities, make sure you seek that consensus through the organization. I know many of you are fairly small, but as our organization got bigger, when it was small it was easy because everybody was sitting around the table, but as we got bigger and got into more schools and got into more programs, it was really important for Program B to understand why Program A was a priority for this year. And then, but also remaining open to opportunities. You never know when that person's going to walk through the door that could make a transformative investment in your organization. Again, it could be at the Starbucks in the morning. You just never know when it's going to happen. So having the infrastructure in place to do that, we put in place a process where you you know, we just had a series of questions that we went through when we had a new opportunity that came to us. You know, what is it going to cost? What are we, you know, what is it going to take to do it? Can staff do it? Do we have to add staff? All of those kinds of things. And then the last question was, is it politically correct for us to not do it? Because in some cases, if someone brings something to you, sometimes you have to weigh that and figure out a way to make that happen. Case for support. How many have written cases for support for their organizations and what they do? Great, great. Ooh, I like to see those hands. All right. Very, 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 very important piece of what it is that you do. If you've got your funding priorities identified, you can have an overall case for support for the organization. You can also have many cases for support for different programs. We helped with this, right? This is the Raising Special Kids case for support that my colleagues at Phoenix Philanthropy Group did. And you know, some of the things that are important to have, and you can go online and Google on how to write a case for support. It'll give you the outline to do that. Clear and compelling, which obviously makes sense. There has to be some relevance and some urgency in it. Being able to appeal to different motivations in it too. You know, a businessman is going to look at a case for support very different than, in your case, a parent would look at it. I tend to look for the emotional things. What's going to make my heart feel good if I invest? But you know, a finance guy is going to look and see, okay, how's this business model going to, how's this going to work, and how's my investment going to forward this business model? So things you talk about is, you know, I always like to say, instead of funding a program, I always like to ask people to invest, because I think that's a really good word. Capacity building. Talk about building capacity, not just in the organization, but building capacity in the people that you serve too. That's very important. That you're growing and building for the future is usually why everything we do is because we can't even begin to meet the needs of all the people that need us. And then last but not least is to not save a sinking ship or needs. I like to encourage people to only play that card one time. And you may get to the point where you do that, but one time and people will take it as a credible, you need help, and will probably step up. If you do it a second time, people are going to say, oh, there they go again, you know, trying to. Don't appeal to them at that level. Appeal to them at the level of growing, of capacity, of those kinds of things, not that your organization's going to go under. Excuse me, your prospect and donor base. How many in the room use donor management software, have formal donor management software? No one in the room does. Okay, all right. That doesn't matter. I mean, it's wonderful to have that, because what it does is it helps you manage some of those pieces that I talk about, the cultivation, all that moves management piece. All that can be in there, but it's not necessary. I didn't have it when I started out. We managed everything in an Excel database, so it's more, you can do it in Access. It's not so much about what you have, it's about having what you have being applicable to what it is that you're doing, that you use it consistently, and that you use it. I have clients that have the most expensive donor management software and they don't use it. It's like, why would you spend $15,000 on something and not use it? I mean, there are certainly much cheaper alternatives out there. I know that with eTapestry for Blackbaud, if you've got 500 or less donors, that's free and it's online. So if you're really thinking about making that transition to a donor management software system, go on to Blackbaud, and the product is called eTapestry, and it's free for 500 donors or less. I believe that's still the case. And it's all done online, so you don't manage any of the information, you know, the server info, you don't have to have all that information. But that's a good resource if you're just starting out to build that.
But is it secured?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's secure.
Does it work with Macs yet? One of our issues is we have a Mac platform, and so.
That I don't know. I would be very surprised if it didn't, because well, they used to be on their own, and they were bought by Blackbaud, who does Razor's Edge, which I think is the Cadillac of all of them. But anyway, you can go online and research that. But you know, the important part here is this is where all that institutional knowledge around fundraising is going to live. I always like to think of it as, what if I won the lottery? Or some people like to say, what if I got hit by a bus? But I like to say, what if I won the lottery and I'm on a Caribbean island tomorrow? Someone needs to be there to have, someone needs to be able to access that information that is up in my mind. because honestly, transition will happen with us. We'll go to another job, you know, whatever. It's going to happen. So, but you know, the things that you use that prospect and donor base for is to gather your leads from research, get that information in there. It helps you build your list of contacts. It helps you prioritize. So you have this much time to focus on fundraising. Prioritize where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And this donor base and prospect base is going to do that. And it also determines who to cultivate and who to ask. Leadership, and I've already touched on this, but we do have some board members in the room, and you know, I want to say thank you for doing that. I mean, really, I'm on a board now, and I didn't realize what a hard job it is to be, you know, I've always been out from the other side and sitting there saying, why won't that board member do more? But you know, it really is a hard job. When I was managing a board, that was my job to do that. But now I'm on a board and I have another job. So my volunteer work is in my time when I'm not working. So, but you know, certainly making sure your board members embrace the mission, vision, and values, that they do what I said, they ensure that institutional responsibility, and that they advocate for the organization. And they understand and participate. I know that was one or more of the questions about, you know, board members just not participating in development. And really, I mean, in this day and age, and again, go back to those Giving USA slides and show that's where it's got to be at. They've got to be able to make those asks. But we as an organization have to set that forth. It has to be in our job descriptions. When we're recruiting new board members, that expectation has to be there, that they're actually going to participate in that. And then we have to give them the skills they need in order to do that. Or be willing to go with them on the calls. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And they need to lead by example. And when I talk about lead by example, I mean they need to be giving to the organization personally. Not saying, I advocate in board job descriptions to have a give-get amount, but that doesn't mean they have to do the whole amount. But every board member needs to have something personal invested in the organization. And for one person it might be $25, and for the next person it might be $1,000 a year or more. You know, it just depends. But you know, it used to really irritate me when I would see a board member buying a Frappuccino or whatever for $5 at Starbucks, but wouldn't give me a gift. Really? Forego one. Give me $5 so I can say to my funders, my foundations, and my individual donors, who the bigger individual donors now are starting to ask that question: is your board giving 100%? They don't want to ask. They don't necessarily ask how much, but is your board giving by 100%? And you want to be able to honestly say to them, yes, they are. You have to have the infrastructure in place. You know, that donor research, I talked a little bit about that. Again, the good news with all the online stuff is there's so much information out there online. Moves management, donor recognition and stewardship. Often the forgotten piece of what it is that we do, but probably the most important piece. You know, I had a donor that we'd secured a $500, very modest gift from him, very, very, very wealthy man. Very wealthy. And you know, I was disappointed because we asked for more. I was very, very disappointed. The second year we got $5,000 from him. And he said to me, he goes, I was waiting to see how you would treat me. I wanted to know how you would steward me in this year before. I believe in what you do. Your organization's great, you do great things, you know, that, but I wanted to see how you were going to treat me as a donor. So you never know. That's a real important part, and you need to not let that part fall by the wayside. Gift and pledge processing, your infrastructure for that, especially gift processing. My recommendation is that your thank you notes go out within 24 to 48 hours, preferably 24, with the exception of a special event, knowing that you might have 100 people at something or whatever. You know, when I get a thank you note 3 months after I give a gift, and it's in the next fiscal year or next calendar year, so it's like, really, I'm not giving you a gift again. You're so busy that you can't write me a thank you note. I had all my thank you notes for the year, maybe a couple times a year. I would rewrite them, the template, but personalized it, and then I wrote a handwritten note on every gift, no matter what level it was. $5. Joyce?
I just wanted to make a quick comment about that too, about donor recognition, stewardship, and the gift and pledge processing. I do the same thing. I write a personal note on every donor letter. It goes out right away. But on donor recognition, I think sometimes organizations feel that they have to give donors gifts, thank you gifts, and we have found that is not the case. What they really like is a phone call from a board member or from me, or perhaps both, saying thank you very much for your recent gift of $1,000. That meant so much to our organization. That's the type of donor recognition and stewardship that goes a long way, and board members actually, ours enjoy that function, being able to just have a list. These are the people I'd like you to just say effusively, thank you for your recent gift. So not to invest a lot in donor recognition of the tangible variety, but more of the psychic variety. So.
Absolutely. They don't want to see that you're spending money on that.
We did something at our, we had a walk, and we just had some, like, plexiglass isn't the right word, but anyway, big boards that we put pictures of the event on, and had people at the event sign thank you, you know, so they had little kids and their parents, and then we gave those to people who had sponsored that event. And I go to their businesses and they have that stuck up on the wall where all of the people who walk in, you know, thank you to Enterprise Rent-A-Car, or, you know, and it was amazing how inexpensive that was and how much they valued that.
I just did little things like we baked cookies one year after our annual campaign, and we physically delivered, you know, a little package of 3 or 4 cookies to them. Now again, you have to understand, we couldn't do that when we got more donors, but you know, and then we maybe did it another time, but it was a donor at a certain level. Very successful too was had little cards, and we had kids draw on the front of them because we worked with kids in schools, and they just said thank you, or you know, we said tell this if you're going to tell somebody what you wanted to be, draw it. And then those are what I use for my handwritten notes to people. And those things mean so much more than a plaque. You know, those people just don't want you spending the money on that, especially now when the times are tough. They don't want you spending money on that. If you get that kind of stuff donated, though, it's okay to use it if you get it donated. Just it's always nice to let people know that this was generously supported by or funded by.
I personally just get horribly annoyed if I've made a financial contribution to maybe a bigger health organization, and then you just get repeated mailing after mailing with address labels or Christmas cards, or even I've had some with gift wrap, and I think that's how they're spending my money. And that's very, it's a big turnoff when they think, well, they've spent my donor money on buying something for me.
You don't see as much of that, though, I've noticed. People have cut back on that way back. Because I used to get packages and I could never use all the address labels I got. So, and lots of times I got them when I didn't give them a gift either.
Well, I've got 2 organizations that it just seems like almost monthly, and I think I'll never give them another nickel. But they just keep coming.
That financial accountability is in your infrastructure. I know many of your organizations are small, so when you do your audits, it might be, you know, that whole separation of duties and stuff. You just have to work within that the best you can, but, you know, making sure that your board is looking over your shoulder and they know what you're doing. You as a CEO, I was always very open with everything, the good, bad, and the ugly, because I didn't want, you know, they're going to be the ones that are going to also suffer the fallout. It's not just going to be me, but they're going to suffer that also. And then last, performance measurement. We're going to talk a little bit about those it's very important that especially if you're going to invest in a development director position, that you have some performance measurements or some metrics in place. So, roles and responsibilities of volunteer and staff. Volunteers, and when I talk about volunteers here, I'm talking about board members, volunteer leadership, advisors and resources. I have a client that I just love how she talks about her board. It's a big board, 50 people, so a lot, but it's a big organization. She says, I am the luckiest woman in the whole world. I've got 50 consultants at my fingertips. I've got every kind of expertise I could possibly want, and it's all for free to make not only me, but the organization successful. So I think that's a really good way to talk about the contribution board members can make. We talked about advocates, being financial stewards, opening Rolodexes and doors. I think I should probably say opening my iPhone or something now, because everybody laughs at Rolodexes because nobody has those anymore. And that your volunteers are key contacts with prospects. And I put that sometimes, because at some point, someone in your organization has to have that relationship with that donor. That we call it institutionalizing the relationship. They could be, it might be that Joyce, as the board member, has the key relationship, but then I'm the secondary relationship manager. So if Joyce moves on or does something else, that someone in the organization has, that person at least knows my face and knows who I am. And then also give and get, which I talked about, very, very important that volunteers do that. So the ideal board of directors, they lead by example, they give 100% participation, and we always like to say at whatever level they feel they can do that. We always encourage a stretch gift, but whatever level they can do that. So what does staff do? Did these. Our role is to provide information about the organization. One of the greatest things that we can do for our board members is have this case for support developed for our different priorities. Great to have that. And we have to be able to provide them with the information that they need. We're going to prepare the proposals and letters. I think one of the questions was something about turning all the fundraising over to volunteers. And I looked at that and like chills kind of went up and down my spine because, and I just look at it from my standpoint. If I had a responsibility to the organization that I'm on the board, that kind of a key responsibility, but it wasn't really my job, I wouldn't, well, first of all, I wouldn't do it because I know better than that. But I think people people want to do the best job they can, but they're volunteers and they only have this amount of time in order to give to the organization. So all the proposals, all the letters need to be managed in-house. I've heard horror stories, I've experienced horror stories where board members have written proposals and they've gone and written proposals and not told the agency they've written proposals. So then the agency writes a proposal and then the funder calls up and goes, what the heck's going on over there? So making very sure that your board understands everything emanates from, and you don't have to say it from a control standpoint, just say it from the standpoint is we have to be able to pick it, to be able to answer the phone and know what that person's talking to us about. Staff's going to develop the strategies. The board's going to give you that higher level strategic plan and strategic direction, but it's our responsibility as staff to develop those strategies and then then in return, go back to them and have them implement. We're going to manage the relationship management cycle. We're going to manage that. We're going to know where everybody is in that cycle. And we're going to manage all the internal processes. Again, board members managing internal processes is never a good thing. And we're going to support volunteers. We're going to make that a real key piece of what we do. And that's what I said. I said 25% of my time was managing my board and building relationships with them. We need to prepare our volunteers for success. I mean, that's what's going to make them comfortable with fundraising. You're going to have board members that are great at it, but that's going to be about 20% of them. And then you're going to have the other 80 that are going to be really nervous about that. So we need to prepare them for that success, but we also need to prepare them for the fact that they aren't going to be successful. There's going to be an ask. You've all experienced it, or if you haven't, you will, where you're going to get a no. I always like to look at it as it's not a no, it's not just maybe not right now. So try to look at it from that standpoint. But understanding that if you get a no, if a board member gets a no, to take the time to debrief with them about what could we have done differently, and maybe you couldn't have. Maybe it really truly was a matter of timing, and we just know that in August we've got to get back in front of this person because we missed the loop the last time. And no successful fundraising operation is 100% staff driven. It just doesn't make any sense. When you talk about building relationships and people giving to people, it just doesn't make any sense. Performance measures, real quickly before we talk. I said that it's very important, especially if you're going to invest in a development person, because there were some questions about that. So how do you measure? What should you do? Absolutely, you should measure. And this is some of the different ideas of how you can measure. Dollars raised, which is pretty self-explanatory. Activity measures is what we call moves, asks, and closes. So how many people are they moving through that pipeline? How many asks are you going to want them to make? How many are you going to want them to close? Those types of metrics tend to be in a little bit more sophisticated organizations. But certainly things like if you have someone that's doing corporate stuff, they need to meet with their corporate donors once a year. Maybe they need to meet with their foundation donors twice a year. Maybe they're major gifts donors, they want to try to get one face-to-face a year, or those kinds of things. So those are measures of activity. The last thing you want is if you've got a development director that's sitting in the office, that person's not doing their job. You know, people say, well, you know, then the rest of the staff looks at them and goes, well, how come Susie doesn't ever have to be in the office? Because Susie is out meeting people and educating them about the organization. You can ask them to manage a portfolio of prospects. Depending upon the level of gifts that they're securing, it could be anywhere from 25 to 125. You know, if you're managing, if you're responsible for prospects of $500 or maybe $1,000 or whatever, then you can have more of them. But if your person's the person that's going after $5,000, $10,000 gifts, then they're going to need more time to do that. So they need to have less of a portfolio size. Acquisition, retention, and upgrade. You know, how many people are they bringing in the door? How many people are they keeping from going out the back door? And then how many are they taking and moving from that level of gift to the next? And again, as these go down here, those are becoming more sophisticated. Looking at the cost of raising funds and then the direct and indirect impact on operations. I would say if you do nothing else, when you first do performance measures, number 1 and number 2 would be the best. Dollars raised and activity measures. And I always get the question, how much should a development director be making, be bringing in? The industry says 5 to 7 times their salary and benefits is what a development director should bring in. And that can be in a variety, you know, it's going to depend. They're, you know, a more seasoned development director, which is going to cost you more money, absolutely. Someone who's a little bit newer. My first development director, she started as a program person, and I saw something in her that said she would be really good. She's organized, good writer, good with people, and it was an interest of hers. So she started, you know, she wasn't even in that field. So I was very fortunate that I didn't have to pay top dollar for a development person, and she turned out to be the best one I ever had, even after having other ones that said they did all this stuff and then never did it. Cultivation and solicitation success, making contact at the highest level. This is especially important if you're doing corporate solicitations. You know, making sure you're getting in front of the right person. That's where your board members can help on that. Determining who's going to be a part of the team. I always like people to go out in teams. I told my board members, go in teams. If you're afraid to go by yourself, I always said, I will always go with you. I will always make myself available to do that. I'm the knowledge of the organization, because they always say, well, I don't know, what if they ask me this question? Well, it's okay. If you don't know the answer, you just get back to them by the end of the day. I would not expect anyone to know every answer, but going in teams always makes it easier, but being prepared when you do that. So understanding, okay, if I'm going in with Joyce, Joyce is going to do the introduction because she knows the prospect. I'm going to talk about the program and what we think they might be interested in, and then Joyce is going to make the ask. So all that's planned out ahead of time. Now, what's going to happen is we're going to get into there, and Joyce is going to be really new at fundraising, and Joyce isn't going to make the ask. So I have to be prepared and know that Joyce isn't going to make the ask, and that I need to mentally have myself prepared for that. And I know you can make the ask. But if you were, someone that was new to that, having those outcomes clearly in your mind. Prepare the contingency plans. You may have done your research and thinking, man, this guy, Bill Smith, he's going to love this. You're going to be talking to him, and he's going to go a whole other direction. So that's where these cases for support are important. You've gone through the process of articulating what it is that you need to have funded. So how do you turn that around? And you have to be a little bit flexible. Asking leading questions and listening. Really, it's not about you talking in these meetings. It's about your prospects or your donors talking, and for you to pick up on what it is that makes them tick. Being respectful of the time. If you ask them for an hour and you're getting up on that hour and you haven't made that ask yet, just ask them, can we continue? I think it's really annoying when I get into meetings that people don't value my time. And making the ask directly. That was one of the questions. It's like, how do you make the ask? So you've done all your preparation. You know that you're going to ask for a gift of $1,000. So some of the verbiage I like to use is, we would like you to consider a gift of $1,000 to support blah, blah, blah. Or we would like you to consider an investment of $1,000 in our organization to help us do X, Y, Z. So putting it in that frame of context. So not saying would you consider giving to the organization? Because then they're going to go, well, what do you want? Actually, they're probably going to go, what do you want, even before you get to that point. So you need to be prepared to ask, to give them that number. And if you've done research, you should know pretty close to what they might be able to do. People say, well, what if that makes them mad? Donors don't, they may look at you and go, I can't give that, or whatever, but it's not going to make them mad. Actually, most people are flattered and say, wow, you think I can give you $5,000?
Yeah, what do you do when they tell you, I can't give you $1,000?
What?
I mean, you thought they could.
Right,
but,
right,
you know.
right. So then you would go, your question to them then would be, you know, what type of a gift would you be comfortable giving them? You know, is there an amount that you have in mind? You know,
I think people need to be prepared for that, because then, you know, they can read on your body language and you're like, instead of being prepared to, you know, come back or follow up.
Absolutely. But, you know, just again, that's being flexible. It's never going to go textbook. You could script the whole thing. It's not going to happen that way. Know what you can and cannot accept. I mean, you'd be amazed what people will throw back at you. It's like, no, we can't take that. Gift policies and gift acceptance policies will help that too. Help define what you can and cannot accept. Being accountable, following up. If they have questions, get to them before the end of the day. I always take thank you notes with me in the car with a stamp on it, and then I've already written the envelope out. I haven't written the thank you note because you never know what you're going to hear, and then I write that out in the car and take it right to the post office before I go home. Because then they got it, more than likely they're going to have it the next day, and I think that's really, I just think that goes a long ways towards, you know, what would happen if you waited 2 weeks? But that's another good point that you brought up. So if they say, well, I need, you know, my wife and I need to talk about this, we need to talk to our tax person, whatever that might be, the next thing to them is, how about if I can follow up with you next Thursday? So don't give them a yes or no, like, can we follow up? Then they'll say, well, no, I'll get back to you. The question is would it be possible for me to follow up with you next Thursday? So because you're being much more, I guess that is yes or no, but you're being much more specific about that. Okay. Is there any questions on this before I want Joyce to talk a little bit about the Raising Special Kids project and what she's doing with Phoenix Philanthropy?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Ask her.
That's good. I love questions.
When you're talking about the roles of the board versus the staff, I know at peak the staff is so busy and stretched so thin that they barely have time to do things like write letters, and so our board has been more, well, we're trying to be, one of our goals is to be more involved in sort of that letters, proposals, things like that. So you were suggesting that maybe isn't the role of the board, but sometimes just by necessity that might be, until we get some more funds to get some more people. So do you have any advice for sort of, I don't know,
how to make it work?
Yeah.
Manage the process. So I would never turn the whole process over to a volunteer to manage. I mean, I understand that you're busy and those kinds of things, but somebody needs to manage that process. More than likely, if it's a proposal, you've written more proposals, so you understand that it's important. With some funding proposals, it's important that you absolutely follow the directions, that if they say it's 200 words, it's not 201 words, it's not, you know, those kinds of things. And those are the kinds of pieces that you can manage or whatever. You know, if it's just writing, if they're writing, you know, maybe you just give them the questions and have them feed that back to you, and then you manage the submission process, you know, and that kind of stuff. I get where you're coming from, but if you don't institutionalize that, if you lose control of that, then you don't know when it's going to come back to bite you. So, I hope that answers the question. Any other questions on what we've talked about? And I apologize for going quickly, but I had a lot of information to cover. So, Raising Special Kids. Joyce, why don't you talk a little bit about how you came to explore philanthropic fundraising?
I'd be happy to. When Richard and I were planning this presentation, he said, Joyce, I want you to be able to talk a little bit about Raising Special Kids as a test case, and I was mildly freaked out. You get the common thread here. He said, no, really, he said, just talk about the realities that led you down this path towards seeking fund development consulting
assistance, and what was it? And I said, that's easy. I can think of 2 big doses of reality that set us on this path. And the first one was 11.5 years ago, in the early months of 2000, when I came on board as the executive director for Raising Special Kids in the midst of a really serious financial crisis. And my first board meeting was to go and explain to them the true extent of the financial crisis that was facing us, and to lay out a case for the light at the end of the tunnel. How do we get out of this? And my other goal was to say to them, this is painful to be here, and the things that we have to do will be very painful. And the one thing that will redeem it for me is to know that we have a long-term strategy so that we will never, ever be here again. And so I set out a number of things that I thought we needed to pay attention to. And one was obviously to restore our fiscal house to good order in our operating budget. The second was to have an emergency line of credit. The third was to establish a cash reserve and to begin building that so that we had cash reserves of 30 to 40% of our operating budget. The next one was to develop our fundraising capacity and to be able to diversify our funding. And last but not least, it was to create and build an endowment for the future of the organization. Now, those goals have served us very well for 11.5 years. But the second dose of reality came about the 10-year mark. We had a wonderful board president, I think one of the best board presidents a nonprofit could ever have. And one of the things I do with each board president at the end of their 2-year term, I sit down with them and I ask them 2 questions. I say, what is it you are most proud of that we achieved? And the second one is, what are you most worried about for the future of this organization? And the answer was, she looked me right in the eye and she said, Joyce, you are not the founder, but I worry that we are depending on you for everything. And if you would ever leave, I don't know what we would do. And that hit me right between the eyes. I thought, that is not what I want to be for this organization. I do not want to be the comet that blazed through and left a vapor trail. I want to be a rainbow. I want to be the point that fixes both ends of the horizon, the past and the future. And if we're really lucky, that arc will bend, hopefully, toward a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. That will hopefully be that endowment, that will be that legacy, that will be those resources that will ensure that the service that we try to provide for families and children will go on for many, many years into the future. So those were the 2 doses of reality that I really looked at. And I began to think in those terms. And so I talked to the board, we need to have a transition plan. We really need a good succession planning process, so in the event of a planned or unplanned departure, everything is still okay and the wheels keep rolling and we're moving right along. And so we began to develop that executive transition plan, and last year put in place an assistant executive director. And the thinking is that over time, that individual will become more like what Julie talked about, the program person who looks more at the internal operations and aspects of programs and administration, and that the executive director role will turn more into one of external focus. It will be strategic planning, board development, donor solicitation, relationship management, things of that nature. So we're on a long-term process of being able to do that. Yes, Kathy?
I think that's really critical. I don't want to interrupt too much because I know you're going to get to the whole thing, but in your seeking of funds then over time, did you ask for operational support for a salary for executive directors so that you could free up personnel? As Barb was saying, what kind of time?
Right. We obviously were very sensitive to that. We're looking at sources of unrestricted funds, so increasingly more of my time is allocated to G&A, general and administrative. And the grants and contracts obviously are specifically for what they're for, is that program support and staff support to deliver those programs and services. So yes, over time, more and more of my time will be allocated to G&A and will have to come from unrestricted sources of funding. So yeah, it's a very good point. So anyway, one of the things that we began looking at was to think about how do we get to that next level? And I told the board, look, I'm at the top of my game right now in fund development. I can't go any further without folks like Julie and Richard. I need their expertise, I need their knowledge, I need to be coached, I need to be educated, I need to be developed to be able to perform that role for the organization. I don't have any more sources I can go to. I've done all the seat of the pants training and the on-the-job experience and the creative ideas that I could come up with, and so I'm really in need of that right now. And so we began to talk with Phoenix Philanthropy Group about getting a proposal, and we went back and forth on a couple of different iterations of that until we came up with what we thought was a good plan, which is now in place. It was approved by the board in December, and we began in January, and it will continue all throughout this next year. And so I think that they're looking at things like case for support and a deep analysis of the organization and its capacity to do fund development, to develop prospect research, to develop a short-range, mid-range, long-range fund development plan, prospect research and cultivation techniques, board development issues. It's very comprehensive. Larry asked me for a copy of it, and I sent it to him, and I know if that's helpful to any of you, I would be happy to share that information with you as well. So that's really what set us down on the path of which we hope will be a successful effort.
And the components are
and the components
right there.
Right. Yes.
I think you touched. You even know what's in your contract. I like that. That's good.
And then apply the logic model, and yes, all of the things that that were up on the screen are components of that fundraising consulting contract. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about it. Yes, Larry.
Joyce, last night when we were talking, you really got my attention when you talked about this process and the change that was going to happen within the organization, and you felt like it'd be very difficult for staff and stuff, and we didn't have enough time to get you to kind of flesh out what that might look like. Because what I've seen today from both of you has been like it makes great sense, and so I just wonder, how does that affect programs and people, staff and stuff?
Right. I started, as I said, with the board in doing that transition planning, but then it went directly into the staff, and we began identifying the person who's going to be that assistant executive director and put her in that position a year ago. We also began moving the whole staff toward this understanding of how this will work and what this will look like and why it's important to the organization and to the future of the organization. So they continue to receive information. Phoenix Philanthropy Group came in and interviewed, I think, about 7 members of our staff in confidential interviews so that they had input to get into this process as well. So it's an organization-wide effort to make sure everybody understands the importance of this and where we need to go.
So it doesn't affect your mission. You're just going to be better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Our mission remains the same.
You know, and I think one of the important things, and sometimes we get mired up in the day-to-day, is I really worked very hard to have my staff involved at all levels of the staff went through fundraising training. The staff went to all the board meetings. They need to hear the good and the bad. When appropriate, they were liaisons. They staffed committees. I mean, I was on every committee, but I couldn't get to all of them. So, you know, just things like that, and then doing what she was doing. You know, you're building. You know, someone told me early on in my career that one of my biggest roles, yeah, it's to run the organization, but it's also to provide for the professional development of the people that work for me. So I took that very seriously and really engaged them in the things. I taught staff members that didn't know how to budget, how to write a budget for an organization. You know, just things like that, because you never know who's going, it's like my development person, you never know who's going to slot up into a role that I didn't see myself in this role when I started in my career. So, but you know, so the way Joyce is doing it is really getting that buy-in from the whole organization.
We will probably be slightly distinct from you in that regard because of grants and contracts. The staff will know and understand and be fully briefed on everything, but they still will be assigned to their grants and contracts and their duties as we need them to fulfill those for the organization. Their responsibilities for fund development will not be of the type of
the time-consuming responsibilities. It'll be more attitudinal, understanding why it is important for organizations to do this, why it is critically important that they be able to know and talk and understand the mission of the organization and to be able to do that in the community. That's their role. They should be doing it anyway, but hopefully we'll give them all the tools that they need to understand why that is so important and how it connects to fund development, even though they won't be doing fund development per se.
Everybody's a fundraiser.
It's a relationship, as you say, it's a relationship building.
Well, that's really all. I just had a few more slides about, you know, this is a review of the things that we talked about today. Is there anything, because we're on our time is out, and is there anything else that, excuse me, that I didn't touch that you wanted to know? If not, I have some cards and I've got some fun pins up here I'll put up here with our information. Go to the website. You're welcome to email me if a question comes up or give me a phone call or whatever. I'm more than happy. Love to talk with you guys. Encourage you to go out to our website every now and then. We'll have new articles out there that are kind of short and fun to read. And this has just been great. I appreciate all your input and thank you for what you do. You're amazing.